Today we're joined by Richard Cowley from Fulton Hogan. Richard, thank you very much for coming to Chasing the Win, a podcast all about tendering. You lead the pre-contracts team for Fulton Hogan, the northern region based in Brisbane. And really, you're working at the forefront of pre-engagement with clients and tenders for major transport infrastructure and construction.
Deb, great to be here today, and thanks for the opportunity. As I said to you, first podcast, but been looking forward to it. Yes, as you said, I'm on the pre-contracts lead for Fulton Hogan for the northern region. That actually covers Queensland, Northern Territory and WA, so it's a fairly broad remit.
It is.
And I've been involved, I guess, in tendering for quite some time. In fact, all through my career, and it's nearly 30 plus years now. But it hasn't always been as a contractor. I've worked on the client side, worked on the consulting side for the first part of my career. And I've managed to work, in addition to that, not just in Australia. You'll probably pick up a slight Kiwi twang.
It's slightly diluted now.
Slightly diluted and also diluted. I've worked around the world in the Caribbean, Middle East, Africa, and the UK for quite a period of time. So it's quite a little bit of an eclectic mix coming into the contracting market here in Australia.
Yeah.
A lot of my compatriots and colleagues tend to have gone as a contractor and gone all the way through the process. Look, for me, it's been a great adventure and a great journey to get where we are now. And certainly the last 10 years with Fulton Hogan has been very much focused on that front end on contracting, major bid pursuit, and trying to convert those opportunities.
And in relation to that, how do you approach the early strategy work that happens long before a tender drops?
Yeah, it's a good point. If you're coming to a tender late or, a couple of months out, chances are you won't win it. So you have to be aligned early to understand what the opportunity is. There's a whole host of ways of how we kind of identify those opportunities, and it depends very much on sector. There's quite a difference between public sector and private sector. If I cast my mind back sort of 10, 15 years, the ability to engage with clients and take them out and entertain and all of that was prevalent throughout the industry, and it was an important part of networking. Much of that has actually disappeared now with the overlay of Probity. The concern, in particular within the public sector, of impropriety being accused of. And so that ability is actually diminished quite considerably.
It has become harder to understand your clients.
It's become very hard. And look, I understand why. I think the downside, it has made relationship forming a little more challenging, in particular that public sector side. A little easier in the private sector, but even that has changed materially over the years, and again, understand why. But there has been a negative consequence as a result, where the ability to get to really know clients and get them to open up early has certainly drawn back from what it used to be. But establishing a clear strategy, I think, is really important up front. And if you don't, you can still have a go, but you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money chasing bids that you're unlikely to convert. And that's really what we need to try and avoid. And not just for our organisation, I think it goes across industry as well. We're going into a period, and certainly in southeast Queensland and Queensland with the Olympics and the pipeline ahead of us, we can ill afford to be wasting time and being inefficient in what we do.
Yeah.
And that goes across the board, and governments, I think, are starting to understand that. I don't think they've fully embraced it or understand.
Do you think they truly appreciate yet the amount of investment, time, energy, money that really goes into bidding and pursuing bids?
No, I don't think they do. I think there's a material disconnect. And look, to be fair, I think on the contracting side, we don't give enough appreciation to the challenges that government and clients face in terms of getting projects to the start line, in terms of the approvals, in terms of the politics.
Yeah.
Some of that's been, I've had experiences through my career where that's been really profound at times. I'll give you one example. I worked on the Gorgon LNG project over in WA for quite a number of years in a fairly senior role. One of the things that we came up against is that we could not update the program officially, because then the partners, Chevron and Shell, would have had to announce it to the stock market in the the US, which would have impacted share price.
Gosh.
So we had an overlying political driver that actually flowed down to that level, and at a project level, if you didn't see that, the frustration was, why can't we actually go with a program that's more relevant to what the works are, not what was agreed back at the financial investment decision stage. There are things at play outside of our little contractor world.
Yes.
That we just need to be a bit more cognizant that we don't always understand our clients as well as we can. The same token, as you pointed out, clients don't understand the level of effort that we put in when it comes to the tender space. And you'll be all familiar with that. You've lived and breathed it for a long time. Again, another example, I was talking to a colleague. He was within the Defence Force in one of the delivery organisations. He stepped out into the private world and into a contractor, participated in some cost estimate reviews. And I was speaking to him afterwards, and the comment he had was, I had no idea of what you do to build an estimate.
Yeah.
And so when clients, come to you at times, say, oh, can you just change this line or this number? The consequential impacts,
the layers
are substantial. We need to get better at communicating with our clients, I think. And understanding them. They need to get better at living in our shoes a little bit as well when it comes to that level of effort and resource. Probably coming back to the strategy question, it is really important to clearly define for what particular pursuits you're after, what is your edge.
Yes.
We call it all sorts of things, differentiators, unique selling point, whatever it is. At the end of the day, you need to try and find an edge.
I define it as what you can give your client that only you can give your client.
Correct. It's got to stand out from everyone else. And so it is really important to look at that. You need to look introspectively at the organisation you're with. You need to be very cognizant of the market you're competing against, but not lose sight on what you need to do as well. So that's a little bit of a fine balance. But that very much goes into that decision-making process of what we do.
How well do you think organisations do look at themselves in the mirror? I usually use the term, let's find out if you're drinking your own Kool-Aid. So I'm not talking your organisation necessarily, but, that reflecting critically on what you've done before, reflecting critically on how you could go forward. How well do you really think it's done?
I think we like to think we do it well. I think the reality is probably more an average pass, I'd suggest. I think it's difficult to get the right balance between optimism, which you need, and being quite critical in what you can do and what you have done and where your position in the market is at that point in time. And it's not a static thing, it changes, it's dynamic. I think it reflects through too, if you look at the lessons learned type of process that we should all be going through on both projects.
It hurts, but we've got to go through it.
We've got to go through it. But I think, and I reflect in not just the organisation I'm with now, but a number of them, we tend to be quite poor at how we disseminate and actually learn from the experience. I think what tends to happen, human behaviours come into play, egos come into play, people presiding over a project which perhaps hasn't gone as well as you'd like. There's a little bit of protectionism that comes in, and no one really likes airing their dirty laundry, do they? I think whether it's projects or general life.
Absolutely true. It even goes down though to almost to narrative. So, you'll hear people say, oh, we came a close second. Every time I hear a client say we came a close second, I actually look them in the eye. I say, no, you lost. Yeah. And I know that hurts. But the reason I want you to know you lost is because we want you to win next time. Yeah. And so why did you lose? It is required that reflection, those lessons learned, the ability to actually say, how can we do it differently next time? But at the same time, sometimes you lose tenders because they have subjective elements and there's nothing you can do about it.
Correct. And we've lost a number of tenders where we look back and we go, yes, I can see, we've had a debrief, it's been reasonably thorough. And if we're being quite self-critical, you can actually pick up, we could have got that one better. We didn't quite hit the mark on that aspect. And again, as we said before, when you're putting in, weeks and weeks of effort, they can be quite painful.
Yeah.
But you do need to learn from them, that's for sure.
You've worked across Australia and globally. How has that international exposure shaped your philosophy on building long-term trusted relationships, either internal relationships with a team or external relationships with client in the bid phase?
for me, because I haven't been a contractor for a long time, I've played across different spheres, different sectors, and globally as well. I probably have I think, a more collaborative approach to work. I think at the end of the day, you get a far better outcome. Most people I've worked with do not like conflict. That doesn't always hold true. There's some that sort of seek it out. But generally, I think most people in the industry are wanting to do as good a job as they can at the end of the day. And so if you can engage with those people and pull them together in a collaborative style, I think you're always going to get a better outcome. The challenge we have is when it gets down to the brass tacks of contract models. And if the contract model doesn't align with the behaviours that people are wanting to develop and set, it can become very difficult. You end up with teams retrenching into their respective camps, and it's handbags and lawyers and claim and dispute notices at 10 paces, which breaks down that relationship. But the most enjoyable projects and the most successful I've been involved with, and that's not just from a tendering, but then delivery side, have been those where you're working sort of hand in glove with the client. You're there and you're taking the hits when you need to, but you're also working to a stage where if it's a client issue, they're more likely to actually stand up and say, you know what, that one's on us, we'll carry that, and so you can keep going forward. It comes down to trust. It comes down to building a degree of trust with those clients that you're not out there to take advantage. You're there to do a good job. You will stand by your commitments. But equally, if there's things outside of that, clients will take the same philosophy.
It's interesting that you say people tend to want to avoid conflict, and so they like collaboration. But really, what you're describing here is still, it's the careful management of conflict and potential conflict. It's collaborative management of conflict.
Correct.
The issue, as you say, is when the contract mechanism itself isn't reflective of the dynamic or the culture or the engagement that client and contractor or client and provider are looking for. And I think that's really interesting, because a lot of tenders that we see talk about what is your collaborative approach to, and you're encouraged to describe the relationship you're going to build with a client. But then you turn to the next document, and the next document is not actually conducive to that. At what point do you bring up that disconnect? Do you think that during a tender period you could actually bring up the disconnect between the contractual mechanism you've chosen and the culture you're trying to ask us to live by?
I think you can try. I think that the challenge is once the tender's started, you've got process and probities kicked in, and it becomes very difficult to have a dialogue rather than a paper-based
clarification process. Yeah.
I think, though, there's ways you can go about things as well. So we've been delivering some lump sum contracts for the Department of Defence. The defence contract is fairly stringent and robust.
Yeah.
But even then, there's ways, instead of just dropping in a notice for what you think might be a claim or a variation, there's the ability to actually go and sit down and talk and say, well, this is where we're at. We believe we've got entitlement here. This is what we're going to do. We're going to place this in. And so you can forewarn, and you can have a discussion before you resort to actually, dropping the piece of paper on the desk.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things, I think, go a long way to helping people understand where you're coming from. It doesn't mean to say you're going to get them up. And as a contractor, I always tell my guys, we need to protect the position under the contract. So if the contract has obligations around notices and time bars, you need to protect it. It doesn't mean to say you have to flow through with enacting all of those notices that you've put in. And again, a discussion with your client will help set a scene where they start to see and develop some trust. I think, like all things, you have some players in the game who take advantage.
Yes.
And that tends to spoil it a little bit for others.
Yeah.
But I think you still got to keep pushing for the idea of collaboration. I think we will always get a better outcome if we can work more closely with clients. The earlier we get involved, the better. There's a strong push now for more collaborative contracting. I think the whole of industry recognises, and particularly again coming back to southeast Queensland, we've got such a pipeline of work. The industry recognises that we have to embrace collaborative contracting.
There's more and more framework approaches, more and more types of alliancing
Correct.
collaboration.
We've got more challenges over the next 5 years to deliver work than we probably had for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You go back to the size of the pipeline, and it's even bigger than what we had in the LNG boom back in sort of 2008 to 2014, 15.
Wow.
What wasn't happening then, though, is we've still got a fairly buoyant New South Wales market. Victoria's slower. Adelaide's got a lot happening. So there's a lot more pressure on the industry to deliver this sort of Australian-wide portfolio, and in particular in SEQ. So how do we overcome that? We have to get more productive. How do we do that? Well, one of the key ways has to be to talk more, to find ways to unblock some of the roadblocks that we have in place. It's really interesting because productivity today is less than what it was 10 years ago. And that's on a broad measure when you look at units of output or widgets of output per person or per dollar spend. What we do now in a project, though, is so much more extensive than what we used to do. So in projects today, we do a lot of work around training and pulling people through. We do a lot of work around First Nations and Torres Strait Islander engagement, and how do we maximise that employment and the flow down to Indigenous business enterprises and the like. We do a lot more work around social, around engaging with community, managing environmentals are much more of a focus, and sustainability and all those great initiatives that we do. And I'm not saying they're not right. They are the right things to do, but that comes at cost.
And time.
And so we need to collectively understand as an industry, as government, as clients, the more of that we do, the less output per dollar spend we're actually going to get.
Yep.
The question I suppose we all need to ask, have we got the right balance? Because we could always continue to do more and more and more and use projects as a way to perhaps enact government policy outside of the actual infrastructure build. The downside is that community taxpayers will not get as much infrastructure because we're spending more to achieve those outcomes.
Pick and choose your projects and your tenders that you're putting these targets and aspirations and policy fulfillment aspects on. At the moment, then there is a tendency that they just apply carte blanche, that there's just an expectation that every project will be able to give back some way, either directly or indirectly. But sometimes with a time frame squeeze, you need to point more to the legacy after the project rather than the legacy during the development of it during the project. And with these, we've got an Olympic-sized deadline. You can't achieve everything within the time frame that you've been given.
No, I think that's right. And I hope over the next couple of years we'll start to take a broader approach as you're looking at. There's a massive legacy benefit of what we're doing. There is a hard end date that does not move.
Cannot move.
And I don't think we really understand what happens if we don't get there, right?
I've been thinking that too.
What happens if some of this infrastructure that we all got the best intent and the optimistic approach, and I think that's wonderful. And I think it is generational what we can do. And I'm hugely excited about it.
But we have to manage the risk that we might not get as far as we think we will.
What do we do? And at what point do we put this flag up and go, oh, gee, we're
not going to get there if.
And at that point, there will have to be some serious sort of compromise, would be probably the right word. What are we not going to do? What are we going to do to make sure we've got a minimum viable outcome?
Yep.
Recognising we can do the other stuff later. Funding will come into play as well.
Yep.
The government does not have an endless bucket. It's got funds that it's assigned and they're committed to that, and that's wonderful. But some of these large projects are not fully funded either. And then you've got the challenges of inflationary environment we're going into, and in that pre-contract space, that becomes a really challenging risk aspect we have to try and understand, and we have to try and manage. And I've seen reports of from some of the QSs out there, quantity surveyors, escalation in the order of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% over the 3-4 year period.
But you've got a crystal ball, don't you? You can see it
all.
I
do, and I've got a cloth that sits over it on the bench, and no one else can look at it.
And a come in and I will tell your fortune sign on the outside of your office.
It adds a complication. We've all got to get our head around it. But as I said, it makes it pretty interesting at the moment.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about communicating with clients, not necessarily like putting the contract in the drawer. Obviously, maintaining your position, safeguarding your position but putting the contract in the drawer. I actually delivered some training a number of years ago to a tier 3 contractor. They were actually losing their bids because of their operations. They were losing their bids because of the way their CAs and their CMs were talking to the client and were using the contract. And the training actually focused on the fact that you are the first step to us winning more work. And I don't, I came into the organization because they said they don't seem to understand that the client's not giving us, and this was mostly private sector, the client's not giving us any more work because they don't like the way we're working with them. And that training was really enlightening because I actually saw a number of light bulb moments where the people that were in those roles went, oh, if I just pick up the phone and explain the context first, if I just go in, we write about no surprise approaches all the time, but whether that translates into delivery, the no surprise approach, even in that sort of contract. So it was interesting because I hadn't reflected on that in a long time. And I think it's something that probably need to bring to the fore again with clients, that everything you do during your delivery and your operations impacts your ability to win again with that client. Would you agree?
100%. And we're only as good as our last project, right?
Yes.
It's played out many times where you can have the best team in your tender camp, and obviously tenderplus will be a part of that.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, without
you could
doubt.
have the winning strategy, the case studies that back it up. But if you've got a problem project with that client out there, where things are in distress, where the behaviours are reverting more to contractual, as a contractor, when you're facing a significant loss, it's a major deal. I think sometimes clients don't understand that stress, but the ability to then convert that tender, no matter the quality,
just diminishes over.
It does diminish, and so the role of the whole of the organisation as a spearhead to try and convert work is probably undervalued.
I often draw a Venn diagram, the intersection between business development, pre-contracts, the commercial and tendering team, and operations. Winning tenders is the sweet spot between all three of those dynamics. When that can come together, it can be some of the most enjoyable work that you have, honestly.
The way we set up project teams, and we're no different to others, you have delivery teams, project managers, and you've got right the way up to CEOs, and we're incentivized to meet commercial return and performance. Project managers are incentivized to meet tendered margin and better it if they can. And so it develops this approach where you can at the project level become very focused on the return, and that becomes focused on your claims recovery, and that behaviour can lead to more conflict. I think the organisations that really get it right, they have that circuit breaker level, that operations type of level, who can step back and say, there's a strategic imperative to not chase that one, because if we do, it's going to really put our client off site, and we've got all these things happening in the background, right?
See the massive picture and the interrelationship within it.
You get some project managers who are able to step above their project and do that, but typically they're really focused downwards, as they need to be. So unless you do have that in place and the ability to strategically step back, it can be challenging. But even saying that, we've had situations where I've thought we'd pull together a fantastic tender, really strong submission, and we haven't got through. And I reflect back on those and recognise, maybe at that time that project may not have been doing quite as well as we thought. I
thought it was.
And again, trying to truly understand within the business the state of some of their projects is not always something that's talked about too much either.
I've really enjoyed, and I suppose this doesn't apply quite as much in the contracting space because your project's finished, but incumbency in the service space is really interesting, because strategically I've often worked with clients and said, what's the worst thing you're doing at the moment for that particular client? What are you doing really badly? Where are all your elephants? There's a herd of elephants running through the room here, not just one. I want to know where they all are. They seem to be invisible elephants, but let's expose them. And we've won off the back of addressing those inefficiencies, addressing those perceptions of weakness, addressing those perceptions of a lack of communication or an adversarial approach to certain things. I do think often tender strategy is seen as separate from current operations. And I think the more that you look into what you're currently doing with your clients, particularly in an incumbency position, the more likely you are to actually be successful next time around.
No, I think it's quite astute what you're saying.
I want to talk about partnering just quickly with you. Effective partnering, obviously, or critical on major bids. You can't do it all. You need frenemies. How do you evaluate potential partners early on and make decisions that will make decisions for the right partnership that you know will stand up under the pressure of competitive tenders?
The importance, I just want to stress on the importance of the partner selection.
Yeah.
I had a week's down at Melbourne Business School in an executive leadership course recently. And part of that, we had to unpick a particular focus and build a strategy around that. And I went through quite a detailed process looking at what we do as a business and how do we do it and what are the real key factors to, in my case, I wanted to convert more tenders. I want to get better conversion. And time and again, it came back to, on the bigger ones, partner selection is the number one criteria you have to get right if you want to convert projects when they get outside of your ability to deliver them by yourself. If I look at the landscape in Queensland, we do a lot of joint venture work. It's just the nature of the work, in particular for TMR, Transport for Main Roads. As soon as it gets above a certain value, there's almost an unwritten expectation. A joint venture is a good thing because it gives TMR more certainty on resource. It spreads a little bit of the love.
Yep.
And they want that to take place.
Spreads a little bit of the risk.
Spreads the risk. So that selection of partner becomes really critical early on to try and work it out. And it's not always easy. If you read all the manuals and how to tender, you'll take time and you'll talk to everyone and you evaluate and everything else. Rarely does time present that luxury.
Signed up before you can get them.
Correct. Quite often we'll find out, the industry will find out about a tender that's suddenly come. We may have known roughly, it'll suddenly hit the market, and within a week, you will have contractors, designers teamed and formed. And that week, I'll typically spend most of the time on the phone.
Yeah.
Talking, understanding who's lining with who. We'll have our own preference where we want to play. But again, we're not always in the driving seat. And so you need to understand where you are. What is it that you bring to a partnership that is attractive? What do you want to see in a partner? Right? I think the number one...
Which partners do you really want to work with?
Well, I was going to say, I think the number one thing is behaviours and culture. We talk about culture a lot and what is culture and trying to define it. It's always a little bit challenging and difficult. But unless you can establish a relationship in a similar culture, how you go about business, it's going to become exceedingly difficult to maintain the relationship.
Over delivery, absolutely.
Over delivery. And look, let's be honest, in the tender period, we're in kind of the honeymoon stage because it's all ahead of us and it's all exciting. And if we win, great. But you need to be certain that over the long term, when things get a little bit challenging, the relationships are there that you can sit down and you can actually talk and you can be quite frank about if they're not meeting their requirements and commitments, or if you're not, and find a way through it. So that culture, relationships at key levels, I think is really important. And then you look at what is it that they can bring that we don't have. Sometimes it might just be capacity. Sometimes it might just be reducing risk. Other times it might be, well, we don't have that particular skill set. Maybe it's a marine skill set, or maybe it's an airport. And so that becomes why you might align.
But it's such a strategic decision,
it is,
isn't it?
It is.
You've got your client then in the back of your mind as to how they're going to perceive that partnership, how whether that's actually going to fulfill how they define capacity, whether they want a smaller player, a bigger player. Like, I suppose what the discussion just shows that it is so strategic, and it's so important, again, to start that process of partnership development super, super, super early, and to be able to have the time to recognise whether you actually want to work with certain organisations in an ongoing capacity.
Yes. And to that end, in my role, I need to understand implicitly what we do and what we're good at, what we're not, where our strengths are. I need to have a pretty broad understanding of what the market is as well. If I'm going to go and partner with contractor A or B, I better understand what they do, what their current projects are, how are they going, what's their perception with the client. It's all very well us partnering with the perfect partner, right culture, and then finding out down the track that I've pissed that partner off, excuse my language, and there's no way you're going to get through. So we've got a whole lot of processes internally and documentation and everything else. But again, I'll be honest, I tend to find that just having a broad understanding of that market, thinking ahead and processing it, the documentation can follow, but most of the time we will land on the top 2 or 3, and through some further analysis we'll land what our preferred is quite quickly.
Yeah.
But it's from knowing the market. It's like the old story about the old bloke in the warehouse, the machine's broken down. He comes along and has a piece of chalk and he puts a sign where the problem is. No one else could solve it. And he gives an invoice for $2 for the piece of chalk, $30,000 for knowing where to put it. It's understanding the industry, and it's the time you have in there to form relationships with many of the clients. And as you say, it is frenemies.
Frenemies.
Right?
You can't burn bridges.
No.
But I think that goes for any industry. It's really interesting. I work a lot with the not-for-profit industry, and never the twain shall meet with any of them. And I really encourage all of them to look at their purpose and to realize there's so much alignment there. But because it's such a competitive environment, they tend to be enemies rather than friends. And one of my goals at the moment is to advocate for joint venturing of not-for-profits for funding and grants. And I see it across industry though. So you've got to be mindful. I don't call competitors anymore. I don't know if you've read Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, but he calls them worthy rivals. And I think that language really helps, because if you perceive the people in your industry who you compete against as worthy rivals, then you're also more willing to partner with them. And that positive perception influences how you then behave with them.
And it's interesting, we had there was an industry breakfast yesterday morning, and I enjoy them because I go in there and I'll see all my counterparts from the other, and we tend to actually almost congregate and mingle and talk about where things are at. And so that level of relationship and trust you do need to build, and you need to have that to help secure which partnerships you want to go into.
So insight into your pipeline, obviously essential in pre-contracts. What are your go-to methods for uncovering early opportunities without giving too much away?
Sure. I won't give the secret sauce.
Yeah, don't give the secret sauce away.
Depends which sector we're in. If we're talking about the private sector, then we need to be talking directly to clients, and we need to be talking early and understanding what it is that they have coming up.
Define early for me.
Oh, look, I'd like to be a couple of years out from a project.
Say that and scare people all the time.
Understanding what the project is.
Yeah.
And the bigger the scale of the project, the more important that time frame tends to be. If we're talking the public sector, and state road authorities are a big client of ours, Department of Defence, then it's a little bit more difficult to engage with the clients. Not impossible. You still need to do that. We will quite often use the relationships formed on projects as a way to develop that trust and talk about what else is coming. I'll catch up with key client members, and they'll talk about what they can.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go to industry events and listen, and a little bit is listening to the market grapevine, and one does exist. It's interesting. We'll submit a tender and we'll wait, and then on the day of award, typically within half an hour, I'll know every outcome. The market does communicate like that, and I think that's a good thing. I think it helps us all understand we're in or not. As a contractor, we'd much rather prefer to know early we're in. Yes, if not, cut us free. We'll go off. That's fine. All those mechanisms help build a picture of what the pipeline is. And we have a fairly robust database that we track it all in, and I update that whenever I hear a little bit of tidbit that this might be coming early or late. You need to keep a watch on funding, where that's coming from. So in particular with state government.
People don't like reading budget papers for bedtime stories, but I think they're excellent.
They do provide insight as to where the money's coming from, and every project needs to lead back to the funding.
I want to come back to one word you said in that. You said listening, and I thought that was wonderful, because client listening, it sounds like a wanky term, really. Client listening, but that's what it's all about. It's actually about sitting back and listening.
It is.
Not telling them about you, but asking them the open questions and allowing the space to actually hear what they are saying.
I think most clients, we try to work with repeat clients more than not, because there's that degree of trust. One, we know they're going to pay as well.
Mm-hmm.
But typically those clients know who you are as well.
Mm.
Conversely, especially if you're doing a project for them at that point in time, they know who you are. So you don't need to go in there with all guns blazing. This is a sales pitch.
Rah, rah,
rah. Look what we can do. Aren't we great? And I think if you can just sit back and take it in a little bit and listen to what their problems are.
Yep.
Remember that they are people as well.
Yep.
Right? They have their own challenges in the work life and personal life. And if you can develop a little bit of rapport outside of the immediate business, that always helps as well. They're just people.
I'm going to throw something at you, and I've mentioned it before separately, and there is part of this podcast that's going to talk about it, but I often talk about kindness in tendering. What's your perspective on that?
I think it's important when we're doing the tender with our tender teams. I think that's important. I think, you've gone through tenders, they can be stressful, right? And a lot of it comes down to planning as to how stressful they'll be. But you do have to be kind with people and teams. We can't lose sight in the industry that if we want to keep people and retain people, that people have a whole host of their own things going on at the same time. And just because a client's decided to drop a date here and all this work has to be done, doesn't mean that aligns with someone's personal life at the same time. So I think it is important to reflect on that and understand that. It doesn't make it easy, but at least if you understand, you can put steps in place to counter. There are always things we can do to offset if someone's not quite there, if someone's under stress. There are things we can do if we know.
That's it. Yeah.
If we don't know and that person keeps pushing through, doesn't necessarily lead to a good outcome on the tender because they may not be focused.
Yep.
And it certainly doesn't lead to a good outcome personally in their view of that piece of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So bid, no bid. What's the most critical factor in your perspective to make that final decision to invest in a bid?
I think it's being really honest with yourself. Do you have an angle to win?
Well, that's I love that.
It costs a lot to bid. We touched on it before. A big bid, a big design and construct bid, we might spend up near close to 1% of the project value in the tender phase. I think you need to be confident that you can put up an offer that has an angle where you can win. We recently, some work up in North Queensland, most of the market went for it, and we decided not to. And the reason being, we might have got through, but I didn't have any real angle to do that.
Yep.
And we had one or two other things on at the time, because the other point you need to understand, everything you do bid is something else you won't. Tendering can be quite a tough game. We put a lot of effort in as a team over a short sprint period. You put the documentation in, which is extensive in itself. You sit there for goodness knows how long, and then one day you'll find out you're successful or you're not. If you're not, you can pretty much put all that work and effort into the bin, and if you are, then you'll have a relatively small celebratory period.
Yeah, you'll go yay, and then you'll get to work.
Before you hand it to a delivery team and they start poking holes in all the things you missed and whatever else, right? And then you're on to the next one.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very cyclical process. And so I think it's important to understand and reflect on that. I think this is a bit of a game in some ways. It's an important game, but just keep it in perspective as well. We need to have a little bit of resilience in the game of tendering to recognise we're not going to win them all. There'll be some we really want to win and we don't, and that's tough. Yeah. But we also have to be a little resilient and recognise that the sun will come up again tomorrow. There'll be another tender opportunity, and it may actually be a longer term, better outcome. And I've seen that time and again where we've missed key bids. We thought this was really important. Hasn't gone through and we're disappointed, and within 6 or 12 months, something else had come through, and had we won it, we'd never have played on this one.
One door closes, another one opens.
The other one opens.
Even wider.
Sometimes that is the case, right?
Yeah,
and
it
so
is,
I think
absolutely.
you need to stay resilient, stay optimistic, and recognise
when not to bid.
Correct. Some of the best projects we've done are the ones we never bid.
That's it.
When I look at the sidelines at them.
Pre-contracts teams really sit at the intersection of client expectations, internal capability, and competitive markets. How do you align your internal stakeholders so that they understand what the opportunities and risks are that go into winning?
It's a good question. And look, within our immediate tender teams, we have some quite diverse sort of personality types. Some of our estimators are quite introvert and they plug away. Like all organisations, there's varying degrees of governance structure and internal approvals and sign-off. Bringing those people along the journey, in particular the people who are going to sign off. And so if we have a very large project goes up to board level, bringing them on the journey from the early stage and to explain the rationale and the thinking behind why we might be wanting to partner with this player here and explaining it and getting them on board is really important, because once you've got them on board, you're not going to have that challenge. They're going to be supporting and they're going to be behind you.
They won't chuck an albatross.
Correct.
Swoop in, poop and
But
leave.
if you try and progress all through and short circuit some of the approvals and then you put it up, that can be a bit more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Early discussion and in our organisation,
early real buy-in.
Yeah, I think so. And look, for me, it's great. I've got a direct line in our organisation to our CEO and the group CEO. So if I see something I want to talk about it, I'll go and just chew the fat. Yep. This is what I'm thinking. This is where I'm thinking about heading on this one. Are you comfortable? We can explore that and bring them on the journey, but do it early.
I really think that approach works at all levels of the organisation, providing context for why we're doing things, the way we're doing things. Even the most junior people on bids need context. They need to feel that whatever contribution they're making that contribution to something strategic. I remember back, I was working in a job in the Solomon Islands, it's a whole nother world, but I asked a project coordinator to buy fire extinguishers. And she had, 7 years of uni behind her. And she's like, why are you asking me to buy fire extinguishers? And I said, because we're about to, support the government to put this person on trial and his supporters are likely to burn down the courthouse. And she's like, best bit of context I've ever been given. And I've taken that since, I think I was 28 when I worked out I had to give somebody context. But to give everybody context along the journey of the bid so that they understand what their contribution is, either at that coordination level all the way up to the approval level.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So looking across your nearly 2 decades, it's probably 3 then.
3.
No? Well, 3 in everything and 2 in pre-contracts. What do you see as the most necessary capability required to excel in tendering?
I think you need to be able to stay optimistic in what you're doing. You need to enjoy it. Yeah. You need to enjoy the challenge with it. As I said, it's not always easy. You certainly need to have some resilience. You need to want to work with people. Certainly at my level, a lot of what I do is about relationships. It's about forming trusted relationships with clients, potential partners, with our design partners, and also within the team.
Yeah.
You're going to ask the team to put in some extra effort over and above their normal. And when you've got big tenders with hard deadlines, teams put huge efforts in. We have people sometimes working all-nighters just to meet that date. Try to avoid it wherever we can. And it's important afterwards to reflect that and say, well, I don't want to see you for another week in the office, off you go. But it comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, people. So if you can relate to people, if you can have some optimism in what we're doing, be a little bit humble and a bit of resilience, and I think you'll go a long way.
Had an absolutely wonderful chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you
For joining us on the podcast. And I will see you soon for a coffee, no doubt.
Sounds good.